Hi, guys. Hi, a very good morning to each and every one of you. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking your time off to be present with us today. I am Vijayaraj. You can call me Raj in short. I'm one of the executive committee member of ISUC, which stands for Integrated Sustainability and Urban Creativity Center of Asia Pacific University. And the purpose of this ISUC Research Center is the research center aim to better meet the needs of creativity and innovation because of social, economic, technological, environmental changes, and also to conform to our university's sustainability-oriented discipline of development strategy. Okay? And welcome to our Spotlight Dialogue. Spotlight Dialogue, for your information, is a informal chit-chat session with our invited guests in the areas of interest related to sustainability. And today, I welcome you to Spotlight Dialogue, episode number 6, entitled Sustainability Standards and ESG Practices. ESG as in environmental, social, and governance practices, right? Now, we all know that sustainability is a huge topic in Hi guys, sorry for there was a slight technical difficulty just now. Welcome back again. So we are episode 6 today. We'll be covering sustainability standard and ESG. As we all know, the sustainability is a very big topic, and everyone is talking about it, doing projects pertaining to sustainability and so on. What we're going to do today is really trying to narrow this wide topic into a specific topic more towards standards and practices, right? So, what we're going to discuss today is really where do sustainability standards and ESG practices stands today in this broad continuum of sustainability metrics. And another thing we would like to also touch base on is how companies perform in respect to their contribution towards sustainability agenda as well, right? To join us, I would like all of you all to welcome Mr. Khoo, Mr. Khoo Hock An. There you go. He's
Hello.
getting. Hi,
Thank
Khoo.
you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Welcome, Khoo. Just a quick intro to Mr. Khoo. He is Mr. Khoo Hock An, who is the director of Green Renewable Organic World, in short, GROW Center, Sindran Berhad. Mr. Khoo has also been the vice chair of the Geneva-based roundtable on sustainable biofuels, biomaterials, and a member of the membership committee of the International Social and Environment Alliance. In short, it's called ISIL. He also advises on ESG platform startups and on companies embarking on in their sustainability journey. And Mr. Khoo, for almost 23 years, he was involved, managed a number of trade associations both in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. To name a few, you are looking at Association of Computer and Multimedia Industry, Malaysian Association of Tour and Travel Agency, Asia Business Forums, ASEAN Tourism Information Center, and ASEAN Chambers of Commerce and Industry. I think we got the right person here who has a very broad coverage, and I'm sure he'll be happy to share with us in today's discussion. So, Mr. Go, let's have a chit chat on the topic of standards and ESG practices. If I may start, I'm trying to look at about how sustainability impacts businesses, right? And really, how is green associated with business? You like to comment on that?
Oh, certainly. Green is a catchword for a movement, a modern day movement, which advocates the interests of the planet Earth, if you must, the ecology and environment in its totality. It's also inclusive of all its inhabitants, and one unfortunately sees businesses as adversary. It's a common perspective that businesses are a bastion or a area of bad business behavior when it comes to exploitation of the resources. So,
Right.
so you have the movement against the business notion, so to speak.
Okay. All right. That's because we always try to understand, businesses. How can business contribute towards green, so-called quote unquote, right? Okay. With reference to new organization who would like to embark, first of all, would like to understand and perhaps implement sustainable practices and perhaps get themselves some kind of recognition and certification. How can they go about doing this? Getting into the world of sustainability and practices. Yeah.
Especially in the last 10 years, maybe going back 15, sustainability has emerged as a very important talking point among businesses, especially when civil society and the government raise issues of climate change and waste management and loss of biodiversity, all these issues on the environment front. So businesses are encouraged to understand, to implement, and even to certify sustainable business practices, so that they can make claims about it in the marketplace or have a appeal to investors who might want to work to invest in their companies. And I think currently they want to appeal also to their workers and their customers who look out for sustainability in these practices of these businesses. So,
Hmm.
what we have today is a whole range of activities going on. in an entire spectrum, a continuum, if you want to say it as such, of between the best practices and the worst practices. And it's a question of who is doing more and who is doing less. We need to understand that.
Okay. So for new organization, what would be the good starting point in terms of their initiatives, from your
It's,
opinion?
it's a very good question. If you can put up my first slide, I'd like to demonstrate the spectrum which I have actually put together. Now, actually, at the starting point, you have to look at your business. Every business actually has a system boundary. And this system boundary is defined for accounting purposes. You need to calculate what are your costs to your business, and you need to calculate also what is your revenue so you can calculate your profit. The system boundary, unfortunately, leaves out society and environment in the very early years. And it's been so, the corporate centric entity, if they are doing business as usual, has that system boundary where they only calculate what they put in and what they take out in terms of revenue, and they take in the externalities as free. To make the transition, you need to include society and environment within your system boundary, and that's a difficult part because then you end up with things like true cost, and your costs actually go up. Then the question becomes, what do you do as a business? If I can have the second slide, the next slide. So we have a continuum whereby I put it this way: all the business practices in the last maybe 30, 40 years. I think sometime 30 years ago or 40 years ago, the UN or the World Bank came up with the idea of good corporate citizen. Corporations are supposed to contribute to both society and maybe mostly society at that point in time. So they have this CSR, corporate social responsibility. If you can see my slide, it is, I think, the green part. That's the beginnings of good business practice. Then gradually they move to ESG, what you have today. And this practices that has emerged, and the what do you call that, reporting institutions, the financial institutions all look at it that way. Then you gradually move on to voluntary sustainability standards, which I'll get into, which are multi-stakeholder activities, and then gradually go on to mandatory standards, what could it, sustainable development goals. And if you see
Mm.
this, I have shades of green. At the most extreme end on the other side, you have green eco-centric values, where if you remember my slide earlier, you have actually included the system boundary, within the system boundary, society, environment. So the continuum is on the basis of how much have you included within your system boundary. So that's the reference I like to make, so that new businesses, any organization looking at this, can understand where they are along the spectrum at the starting point. We understand everybody is at different points, but as long as they try to make the attempt to get greener, then we encourage them to do so. I hope that answers
Right.
your question, Raj.
Yes, yes. But I want to just clarify terminology I just spotted in your slide.
Yes.
You're talking about green supply chain for business. What are you referring to when you are saying? I know about supply chain, but now this element of green comes in. How can one give clarity on green pertaining to the supply chain for business?
That's a very important question. Before, I think in the 90s, the green movement has been basically looking at influencing governments and consumers to enact legislation as to how to improve the environment and maybe even social conditions.
Right.
But that gave way to the NGOs, particularly from the developed countries, to influence global supply chains. So global supply chains have been identified up to 2030. Maybe now we have about 200 over of such standards being influenced through a multi-stakeholder process to develop what we call voluntary sustainability standards.
Okay.
And we are talking about entire supply chains here. We're talking about the input subsector, the production subsector, the processing subsector, then the
Right.
distribution, and then to the consumer. The
Right.
entire supply chain has got to be sustainable and adhere to certain standards which have been agreed on by this multi-stakeholder process so that they can be consistent, so that by the time the product reaches the consumer, they know that they have gone through a process that's deemed sustainable.
Right, right. Okay, so this same principle applies for the normal supply chain concept, which we learned that
Yes.
the chain is as strong as the weakest link.
Exactly, and this is the entry point where we talk about the systems approach.
Ah,
Sustainability is very much a systems approach, a
correct.
systems view of economy of the world and how we do things. And you got to integrate many elements of play and activity into this.
Right, right. Okay, makes sense, makes sense. Okay, now I understand that part of it better with the introduction of green. Um, the other one now, we talked about how new organization can embark on this journey and stuff like that. But I always have this feeling that the mindset of the shareholders and perhaps the investors is very important. And I think I'm quite bold to say that some of the shareholders and investors, their mindset may have to change. What do you think about this? I mean, one organization can start looking into it, but if the shareholders and the guys who are pumping in the money, if their mindset has not changed, I think it'll be quite a challenge, isn't it?
It's totally true. And if you remember my earlier slides, you don't have to refer to them now. At the end of the day, we are talking about profit maximization as a driving value system for the corporate centric activity. You have to address shareholder expectations and you want to maximize shareholder value. And when you are doing that, all your decision making and all your activities in the corporation will actually be consequential. So when
Mm,
you have that perspective, you want to reduce your costs, you want to maximize your revenue and your profit margin.
right.
So expectations are therefore important here. And when we talk about ESG, this has been a very broad area where you are trying to address expected investor expectations of profit maximizing or shareholder value maximization. And some kind of balancing has to take place, whereby
Mm,
you have to look at stakeholder interests rather than just shareholder interests. And by stakeholders, we're talking about the context in which your business is placed, the environment where you draw your resources from. If you are in the extractive industry, you need to know what is the impact of your activity upon the environment, how it affects the social groups, the indigenous groups, and then the waste streams that might emerge as a result of your activity, not only from the extractive process, the processing, but also the consumption process. So that's my short answer to you, Raj. Okay, so to continue, what I have in mind is that there is actually a very strong understanding that uh, all the standards and practices are related to each other. The ESG is basically formulated for investment purposes. So how investors can grade or rate their companies in terms of practices. The voluntary sustainability standards are basically for market access. Basically, companies are interested to market their products and services to uh, the various markets around the world in terms of, let's say, global supply chains. And they want to make sure that actually all these activities can be presented as claims that they can make to the marketplace. And even sometimes to meet regulatory or national expectations of what are required of them. We have also on the other end, if you can notice, the sustainable development goals. These are very broad goals, 17 of them, 17 SDG goals that have been established by the United Nations. And they are set as very broad targets for nations to achieve. Companies really also have a role to play, and there are criteria and indicators with which you can measure a company's performance according to how they perform into this level here. So the spectrum actually gives an idea of how companies can rate themselves in which area they are at the moment. I also like to say that in terms of governance of these bodies, the voluntary sustainability standards, there are about 200 over of them now active in the world, mostly in agriculture, in resource-based industries, in manufacturing. But the major ones, they have been at this for many years, and they have been actually preparing standards according to various set processes, because there have been so many of these. And there's this organization called ISUC, the International Social Environmental for Accreditation and Labeling Alliance, which have been a member of the membership committee. And this alliance basically looks at four areas with which standards are established. First, how your organization is set up, governance. Number two, how your standards are set up. Did you go through a proper process of multi-stakeholder engagement? And then assurance, how credible is your standard? You have to go through a accreditation process. You need certifying bodies that are accredited, and they can go into the field and check the standard implementation. And then, of
Right.
course, the impact on the environment, how strong the standard has been on the environment. So I've been going at length, Raj, on how the various sustainability standards and practices have been laid out, and how companies can find themselves at which point, and how they have made various differences according to where they are.
Right. Okay, understand it better now. Especially the benefit for project teams who trying to embark on this. About this mindset and some of
Yeah,
the points you have given. I'm sure will be very useful. Right. Let's move on to another category of topics. More on the sustainability standards and ESG practices.
yeah.
Right. We know that there are all kinds of standards and guidelines out there available in the practice of ESG and so on. What kind of standards are there really out there that we can abide by,
Okay.
and so on?
Okay.
What do you think?
Thank you very much. You know, this is a real alphabet soup when it comes
Hi,
to
Khoo.
ESG. Yeah, can you hear
Can you hear
me?
me?
I can, I can. This is an alphabet soup because you have so many
Khoo,
ESG.
can you hear me, Khoo?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. So
Hello.
I'm going off to
Hi, Khoo.
discuss. I'm going off to discuss about the
Hi,
various
Khoo. Can you hear me?
ESG practices, and basically we have many many
Hi, Khoo.
in the market. And what we have, so what we want to see is that basically, from, as I mentioned earlier, from CSR progressing to ESG, we have at the moment about five principal key standard boards which are active at the moment. They include the Global Reporting Initiative, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Carbon Climate Disclosure Standards Board, the International Integrated Reporting Council, and of course the IIRC, which is the International Integrated Reporting Council, and the Standards Accountability Accounting Standards Board have merged into the Value Reporting Foundation. So all these are active in the background, and companies may choose any one of these to make their reports on. Some are what do you call that? Straightforward. They just want to make it simple and straightforward for companies to do their reporting. Some basically want to look at the areas with which the reporting is made up of. Uh, a more recent development has been the EU taxonomy, where the EU, because of they have a set of laws, they have come up with the EU Delegated Act, which actually provides a threshold for activities that must be met by companies to contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So there are things like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which and then you have the non-financial disclosing directive. All these happening in the EU, but as you might guess, other countries are following suit too, including Japan, Canada, China, and even Malaysia. We have Brazil, we have Chile. All these countries are trying to establish their own national boards for reporting standards and maybe areas to cover. And that's because every country has their own interests, not just the EU itself. And so you have this multitude of various ESG standards out there that are being formulated, and it's very confusing for any one investor or any one company to basically follow which one is best and which one to do and which one not to do. Most of the national boards, sustainability standard boards or ESG standard boards, they are looked at upon as being mandatory. So you have a what do you call that? A difference between the voluntary ESG standards and the mandatory ESG standards that might come into play. And in this case, we have a whole area of activity going on now, and they are being developed at the global level. At the recent COP26, the uh, the what do you call that, the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation announced that they'll be taking steps towards establishing a global reporting sustainability standards, which would bring all these standards together in a common framework. But that process will take some time, probably in the next 2 to 3 years. As you can see, there is a interplay between a global framework driven by the G7 and the European countries. Then you have the national interests, the countries that want to look after their national interests to speak. And then you have the corporations themselves hoping to choose between what is more demanding and what is less demanding, where their shareholders or even their stakeholders are concerned. It's
Right.
a very long, convoluted answer, but that's the way it is at the moment, Raj.
Right, right. Okay, thank you. Because there are all kinds of standards, and sometimes, organization get confused which standard should I follow and things like that. Just for everyone's information, for example, I'm being in the project management line as well. We have more of a guideline called GPM, Green Project Management, and there's a standard called P5 standard, which guides project managers how to do impact analysis in the various ESG areas as well. So that's why we were trying to explore various guidelines and standards available as well. Okay, great. Now, from the standards now, end of the day, we need to measure to see where we are today, right? And business also wants to understand how do we go about, besides implementing the sustainability practices, would you like to share how business can go about measuring the kind of metrics for measurement that can be adopted?
Yeah, this is a very challenging question, Raj. And I can tell you that the whole point of all this is how to measure. At the end of the day, companies want to see where they are and how their performance is, how they rate up to what the other expectations are, whether it's from the investor, the consumer, or even the government, looking at how they are performing. Now, so it all boils down to what criteria you're going to measure and what are you going to exactly measure. This applies to even issues like the circular economy, yeah? And how far along the line are you doing circular economy practices? I can
Right.
tell you that the among the difficulties in this is deciding which criteria or which indicator is the best measurement. Most common one, and everybody knows, is carbon measurement of your
Mm.
impact, GHG
Yeah.
emissions. So when it comes to carbon metrics, GHG emissions, you have all kinds of calculators from personal to corporate to even industrial calculators. And then they go along those lines, looking at their impact. When I was working on the roundtable for sustainable biofuels, I went in on the creed or the thinking that we try not to do more harm than good. When we are in the sustainability arena in this space, we can go in with all kinds of good intentions to develop um, good what do you call that, good practices and good results for the rest of the world. But there's always this uh, issue of unintended consequences or we have to anticipate, all the activities that
Yeah.
might be negative. So these activities can also impact on biodiversity, which is not carbon. How do you measure biodiversity loss? There is a big criteria being set up by the conservation experts, and this has got to do with you take sampling of how many hectares of biodiversity, and then you compare from area to area, and you have some kind of indicator. But this is not the be all and end all. It's not the single
Yeah.
yardstick.
Of
I
course.
can
Yeah.
tell you the other hand, if I may add, that when you look at ESG, the other S in the ESG is social, and social becomes another area of measurement. And when we
Yeah.
talk about this, we
Exactly.
talk about issues like human rights, labor rights. They want to contend against slavery. What modern slavery? What is counted as this? What's the definition of the term? And then we talk about fair wages. We talk about living income. We talk about return to stakeholders. If you buy cocoa or you buy coffee or you buy any product from the marketplace, from your contractors in the field, you have farmers on contract basis. What is the fair price to them? So all these are very important issues. I hope
Right.
I answered your question, Raj.
Yes. 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 Definitely. Okay, because I always thinking from the project management aspect, being in that field, it's interesting to learn more from an organizational and business perspective, really. Okay, now let's move on to another topic still related to what we are talking about. That is sustainability for businesses going forward. All right, we were coming from a bit on the historical side, talked about standards, what they are trying to do, trying to perhaps compile and merge standards for to facilitate users to use those standards and stuff like that. Um, Now, we know there are many sustainability standards, framework, and metrics. I'm sure the organization are hoping that there will be a standardization of standards. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? Yeah. So what is your thoughts on this? Will that be a possibility of one day, hopefully, all these various standards can be standardized and make it easier for organization to, sort of adopt it or something like that? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly, as mentioned just now, there's a whole wide movement to make it easier
Mhm.
for companies to make a reference as to how they are performing, and they are coming from different directions. But there are contending perspectives. I mean, the EU has come up with their EU taxonomy, the green
Yeah.
taxonomy, and they
Yeah.
want it to be the global standard. All right. And then the G7 wants to have their activity put in place as the reference point, and so does the US. So the main players of the global economy are trying to set up the rules of the game.
Right.
And then we talk about the private sector. They have their own activities, the various voluntary standard boards. They're trying to come up with their various harmonization of these standards to make it
Okay.
easier, reference point. And then you have the the national efforts to do this. So going forward, there's going to be a lot of interplay between all these parties, and it's good that this dialogue and this activity all goes on. The IFRS, which is the International Financial Reporting Standards Board, made the
Mm.
announcement on COP26. It's
Okay.
very good that they've made those announcements, and hopefully by some time the ESG can come around to some level of a common understanding of what they should. But as I pointed out in my earlier reference to the spectrum, a company at the end of the day has got to look at its main objectives. Are they mainly for shareholder value maximization, or do they have to look at stakeholder value maximization and harmonization, or rather the word optimization?
Right.
And if we have this is a fundamental address of what business is all about and what
Mm.
impact it has on the planet.
Mm.
And this is a question where we all have to answer and try to address at our own local levels. And this is where later on we may have to do more in this area.
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, I think I'm happy to hear that these there's a body looking into this, trying to standardize the standardization of all the standards and things like that. Now, coming to our local scheme in Malaysia, as we all know, I believe since October 2015, the Busa Malaysia has launched the new sustainability framework comprising of amendments to the listing requirements. That's one, and a sustainability reporting guide, right, to help public listed companies to
Yes.
improve their sustainability related disclosure. Right now, I always wonder, right, and I know companies has been together with their annual financial reports. They are expected to attach their reporting on their sustainability initiatives and stuff like that. Um, you see, I always wonder the financial reporting aspect, as you all know. You have auditors, internal auditors, and also external auditors auditing on their financial numbers and things like that, and certifying and putting their Adobe job on there. However, I always wonder when they are reporting on the sustainability reporting aspect, disclosure of the sustainability reporting, is there anyone actually auditing and or shall I use the word in a more loosely manner, doing a quality assurance on the sustainability reporting on the matrices which has been reported? How accurate is it, and verifying these numbers and things like that. I don't know whether there's such body, and maybe it's something future to be considered as well. Any thoughts on that, Khoo?
Yeah, that's very interesting to address. At the moment, the Bursa, of course, have come up with their guidelines, and these guidelines have been presented while the whole world is going through a dynamic of harmonization as to what to refer to. So, can you imagine an investor from the US looks at a Bursa requirement and sees a different
Yeah.
requirement from what they're used to, and then we have our local investors. But I think the Bursa is referring to one of the key five uh, 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 standard setters, if I'm not mistaken, is the GRI. And what happens is that eventually all these will be harmonized, and then we have a good reference point. But we also would need third-party validation of what your reporting is all about. There has to be a independent assessment, usually at each point in time.
Yeah.
So this is where the boards come in, the sustainability standards boards at play around the world all come in a general sense. They may look at auditors who may see how your reports measure up against this kind of practices or practices that you're supposed to adhere to,
Yep.
and then you can go forward with that. I
Yep.
take the example of the voluntary sustainability standards for market access for the supply chains. So not only do we have the standards being set up, but we have accreditation bodies. We have third-party auditing that goes on to make sure that assurance that the claim being made for the product is there, that
Right.
there's no cheating going on, that there's no uh, weaknesses in the system whereby external parties may identify and then be criticizing the company for not complying. And worse still, if a company makes a claim and is found not to be valid, then the company can be accused of greenwashing. And greenwashing is the
Wow.
ultimate sin in the sustainability business. If
Absolutely.
you purport to say you are doing one thing, but you're actually practicing the opposite, then your credibility actually goes down the drain. And the whole
Yeah.
practice of going on this is to make sure that you are not labeled as a greenwashing. You're not being indulging in greenwashing.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
all can understand that everybody starts from their own point where they are, but at least you should make a progression, not go in the reverse, whereby
Yeah.
you do worse, but you're actually saying you do more.
Yeah. That's right. So I guess in the auditing business as well, when you're talking about auditing the sustainability reports, I guess auditors need to upskill their knowledge and techniques of auditing in this area as well. I guess
Yes,
going forward.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Traceability is one of those areas right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Cool. Since we guys here are from the university environment and from the research center as well, um, do you have any suggestions for topics or possible area of research in this sustainability standards and ESG reporting and things like in this area? Any suggestion which the university perhaps can take it up, for further deliberation and research and possibly publishing papers in due course? Do you have any
Oh,
thoughts on that?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Given my own experience in this field and the discussions going around,
Yeah.
and what should be done, I think we can do more in the area of sustainability innovation,
Mm-hmm.
and inculcate more sustainability-oriented values into business models and leadership. For example,
Okay.
we should look more into whether how stakeholder capitalism can be effected as a alternative to shareholder capitalism.
Yep.
uh, and we have new technology and tools that actually make all kinds of innovations possible.
Right.
Democratization of shareholding, for example, through technology. More people can own crowdfunding, for example.
Mm.
This is new models that we can use, and I can tell you, I mean, you will agree, technology plays a big role in that.
Yep.
And when you have that, we can enlarge the discussion around stakeholder boards, how the stakeholders rather than just shareholders can come and have their inputs in the decision making of companies, so that the management, the CEOs and the C-suite, which will encompass all the various aspects of management,
Right.
can then consider in the decision making what is a good practice to have. There are a lot of boards that come up with sustainability declarations and declarations now, and they put out all the declared goals, But
Right.
how to execute it is the key issue, and universities like yours, the APU,
Right.
can actually explore the use of technology in all these areas. The other area is in the flattening of the supply chain processes. And this allows for more transparency, auditing, and certification of the supply chain, traceability, as I've mentioned before, of the system. Maybe you have the reduction and proper management of waste streams within the urban framework as prime examples of research work that can be done in the field. Improved practices come with the standards expectation. What are the standards expect from companies? And then the reporting of these to the concerned public. So all these systems, you can have real-time performances. I would love to see how companies react to real-time monitoring of the activities by the stakeholders. This
Right.
this kind of innovation, which should be possible as we go along,
Right. Right.
and technology makes it all possible, and
Okay.
the feedback loop and the feedback system can help companies improve their management and decision making processes.
Right.
So
Right.
there's a lot there to be done in research areas, and I hope and I look forward to APU contributing in this sphere.
Yes, we wish to. We wish to. I think that's why we are dedicated a research center just in this arena as well. Definitely, these are interesting topics to further look into it. Thank you, Ku, for that. Yeah, I think we have sort of, as far as the dialogue is concerned, I think we have come to an end. I think I would like to move on to the Q&A session, right?
Sure.
So I'm just going to try to pick up. I see some questions being posted on the chat. Um, okay, there's a question on which are some international standards frameworks needs to be followed. Is there any centralized one? What's your thought on that? I think we
Uh,
discussed a bit on
yeah,
this.
we actually discussed, especially where ESG is concerned. There are quite diffusion right now of many various standards that have been developed, and the process is trying to develop a global harmonized one, and that's extremely difficult because businesses, as you know, differ in different contexts, different industries,
Mm,
different locations, and trying to get one standard that can apply to all will be a real challenge. But at least we should have a common framework approach
right,
as to the principles with which we look at how these standards are developed and practiced. And I think those are starting points. But at least the world is talking about it. It's no longer fragmented. It's no longer
yeah,
diffused. So there's that process going forward.
Okay. Okay. Hope that has answered one of our participants' question. Let me just move on. And there's another question on long global supply chains are hard to monitor, right? And is there a role for blockchain technology in making monitoring easier?
Certainly, I'm going to be the first to jump in with a yes on that. In fact, for transparency, for the traceability, for certification, blockchain has been
Mhm.
advocated as one of the technological tools that can be used for tracing the path of the product through the entire supply chain, so that the
Right.
consumer knowing that there is, let's say, a claim being made that this product is sourced and processed and produced and distributed through sustainable activities all throughout the chain. He
Right.
knows that there is a clear-cut path, that it comes from a certain plantation, that in the agriculture sector, if it's mining, is a different thing, or in any other industry, and
Right.
then you process with the minimum or the required carbon footprint. You are distributed with a very green logistical supply chain, and the I suppose you can look at it even in terms of the circular economy, packaging, and the processes uh, have all been accounted for.
Right. Okay. I think I'm just going to put under the topic what we discussed earlier regarding possible further research areas, right? The
Yes.
use of perhaps the use of blockchain technology in monitoring the processes in the supply chain. I think that's a good one there actually. Just about just like that. All right. Let's move on to the next question. What processes do we have for the identification of ESG opportunities and impending risk?
Okay, risk management. I'm going to basically assess that.
Right.
You see, let's say there are frameworks that look at how you are engaging in either a low risk or a high risk activity. And I'm going to compare the voluntary sustainability standards with the ESG. So, in developing voluntary sustainability standards, we have unintended consequences. Things like
Mhm.
we in indirect land use change is one of them, and then we can classify activities that can result in indirect land use change. So if there's a very high probability, then we call it a high risk activity for land use change. And if
Right.
there's a low risk, then we do a low risk assessment of categorization of that. So there is a framework that would classify the various level of risk for, let's say, various outcomes that we may anticipate, and then we can make assessments as a result. So some level of assessment needs to be done, and
Mhm.
and this is where in terms of the supply chain you can look at it. In terms of ESG, you're looking at the entire company's business, whether whichever part of the supply chain is in, and certain industries are certainly riskier than others. You can count the extractive industries as very risky,
Right.
because the impact is very high on the environment. And then you have even certain agricultural activities can be risky from the social side,
Right.
and certain companies in certain countries can be risky from the governance side, depending on how well established the enforcement and the governance principles are established. So there's a whole categorization of risk factors. Risk is a very how do you say, uh, popular and common way of assessing the level of exposure an investor can have right now
Right.
in deciding which company performs better or doesn't perform as well in this
Right.
area. And,
Right.
and, and of course, what mitigation measures have been put in to reduce the risk is the other factor. I
Right.
hope I answered that question.
Yes, I think it's associated with the question as well. And just to quickly add on, I think this concept of risk is same thing applied in project management as well.
Yeah.
When we are looking at sustainability impact analysis, it's actually risk management. End of the day, so
True.
that appropriate steps can be taken to prevent or mitigate or whatever risk pertaining to the issues we are talking about. Okay, good. I think there's few more questions lined up as well. Um, Let me choose. Okay. There is a question on how green is going green. Can we assure companies going through sustainability processes are actually following these procedures instead of cutting corners or doing it for the media and publicity? I guess. What's your thoughts on that, Khoo?
Well, there's no guarantee as a result. So we need to have checks and balances. We need to have I'm going to call them watchdogs. The public, the civil society needs to be always on the lookout for transgressors. Uh, but I think a lot of companies are very conscious now of the fact that they need to be on their good behavior, and so they try to address these issues sincerely. I think they want to do it in the best interest of the environment and the social, the planet, the people, while they are making their profit. Uh, we have to give them that allowance that they are doing that in the best they
Right.
can. But while we say that, uh, we have to address that companies need to look at the fundamental nature of their business, and they got to look at where they are on the spectrum, and uh, we have to see we have to come up. I mean, us as citizens of this world, as people who live in this planet, and that gives us the so-called standing to see whether another corporate player, which is actually making its money and its profitability off the resources of the planet, which we depend on,
Right.
where does it stand? And we need to understand the whole scope so better so that we can place the company where it is. We know it is, let's say, in point A going to point B. We need to see that there's continuous improvement. And I
Yep.
think you are familiar with the concept of continuous improvement, CI,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
uh, you need to engage on. You can't be static. So declaration that you are green alone is not good enough. At which point of the green are you, and how greener are you going to get in now and in the future, and at what point? So there's no point stating you are green now. You got to get greener as you go along, and
That's
I think the world has through 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 various conference of parties, with the last one is 26 and many other forums, they have declared objectives with which to save the planet. The critical area is you've got to achieve certain goals in carbon reduction and loss
yeah.
of biodiversity and all that. And nobody is really racing or working hard enough or fast enough to achieve those targets. So, do companies want to do it at their own pace, or do we hurry up the pace? So,
Right.
who's going to be monitoring all that is the question. And if it is not us, who else? Yeah, that would be my answer to that question. Yeah. So Raj, are you able to?
Right.
So there are also questions that look at how, as a profession, on reporting sustainability and on ESG reporting and sustainability, is there any way to start from scratch and go about it? Oh, certainly. When it comes to educating oneself about sustainability, especially reporting and understanding the concept, there's a lot of references out there that one can refer to. There, you can look at the UNTAC reports. You can look at various foundation reports that I mentioned earlier, and the area is still new and very dynamic, and so you have a lot of activities going on here. So the it's very easy to come up with the starting points and still be as how do you call that as up to date as anybody else in looking at how this might be of relevance to you as a student.
Right.
I was
Oh,
addressing, yeah, directly from the comment
oh,
about
good,
how
good.
to go about uh, as a student, to come up to speed very quickly on this topic and area.
Yeah, I think the question was from a master student, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, that's a very interesting. I think something we on the university side as well gives me an idea of designing such courses, perhaps. You know what I mean, in
Yeah.
ESG reporting, sustainability,
Yeah.
auditing, and stuff like that. Great,
Yeah,
thank you very
I
much.
think there's a question now on governance
Yes,
issues like board diversity, board performance, and ethics. Certainly,
yes,
there's a G part of the ESG, and this is going to be very interesting going forward. As I mentioned, it will go with to the very heart of how the company is set up. Diversity, for example, in terms of inclusion, not just gender, ethnicity, community, all these will have to play a role. And stakeholder representation is going to be a critical issue going forward. You set up a plantation in a certain area, or you do mining, or you do a manufacturing process. Are your local communities going to be represented in the decisions that you take? How often do you go into stakeholder
yep,
consultations? Are they represented on your board? And so on and so forth. Ethics will always have to be in a play, and honesty and all these things are all going to be very much coming into the scope here. So you need an all-round activity of monitoring and progression. So transparency will be the most important criteria going forward. So I hope that helps to uh, c- uh, sum up the discussion going forward, Raj, and that the activities in relation to this, especially in the research areas, might point the way forward for more improvement in this area. And I suppose this could be achieved in relation to other activities by corporations and universities around the world. So maybe that would be the area of description that we can go into. And in terms of communication of the ESG story to all shareholders, reporting alone will have to take many more formats, not just the annual reports that we see very often. A company can use all kinds of social media, including its websites and its various social media communications to engage with stakeholders, customers, suppliers, employees, all through the line to make it more available, the information, so that all these can be achieved. As far as constraints, it has got to be looking at how we have to be looking at how companies evolve from their previous mindset to a more open mindset uh, in dealing with the public and dealing with your activities. And that's going to be a challenge because I think companies are used to working within their own parameters and that they do not involve the other parties so much and change in mindset is actually going to be a challenge.
right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have come to the end of some of the questions. I think we have answered.
Yes, it's very good to
I
be
think we're
looking at
having.
all these. Yes. So Raj, so I think we can actually look upon. Thank you for the very informative session we have here, and I think we can look upon ESG as an evolving field, and that we can basically go around expecting more in this to come forward in the months and the years ahead. But we like to look at everything in its context from all the various activities from the point of view of the private sector and the role that they can play in each of these aspects. And to sum up, I think each corporation will need to look at its activities and how they stand, where they stand, and going forward to improve along their activities and their activities as much as possible. So thank you very much for coming on and I look forward to engaging more.
Hi, Khoo. Hi, Khoo. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Okay. I think we have come to almost the end. Yeah, it's almost the end of our Q&A sessions as well. We thank you very much for taking up these questions and providing your insights and as well, right? And okay,
yes.
in
Thank
summary,
you.
I think, sorry, can you all hear me?
I can hear you definitely.
Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Hi, can you all hear me?
yes, we can hear you. Okay, so thank you very much for having me on the show, Raj. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.